liberty to However, am I doing something up here? Is that sorry? Oh, we got audio issues. Okay, I'm sorry. All right. Marco Polo is not a missionary, but he was the first to chronicle his travels in the East. It was first published. He traveled in like the late 1200s, but his book was published in Latin first in 1302, and that began this um, opening up of the eyes of the world to the different culture, the different world in the East, the Mongolian Empire and China. Um, so while Marco Polo was in present-day Mongolia and China, he was meeting with and developing a great relationship with the Mongolian leader Kublai Khan, who was a Buddhist. And Kublai Khan sent Marco One missionary finally made it in 1294. How many years after the request was that? 30 or 28. 28 years after. But it was, in my opinion, too little, too late. Too little, too late. Kublai Khan had been uniquely tolerant and open to Christianity. Though he himself was a Buddhist, he was open to learning more and even having it taught in his kingdom. But he died in 1294, and his successor began new invasions and persecutions westward. So instead of having an open door for the gospel, suddenly the Christian communities in Central Asia are being wiped out. Now, yes, we believe in the sovereignty of God and that all things happen according to his will and his plan and his purposes, but from a human perspective, this is one of the greatest missed opportunities of history. Also, as we look eastward, it's not just China, we've also got India. And so Jordan Katala was the first missionary to India in 1321. We know a lot about him and about India during this time through his letters to other priests. He wrote a lot, and he wrote a lot of letters to priests that he had brought into India and to the surrounding areas and priests that he knew back home. And he was as much of an explorer as he was a missionary. He was traveling all through India and the surrounding areas, detailed chronicles of the nature, the stuff he found in nature, the flowers, the animals, of the politics of the area, the history of the area, the culture that he was seeing there. And so a lot of the early knowledge of the Indian subcontinent we owe to Jordan Katala. Yes? Uh, so the question is, sometimes we hear that Thomas, the disciple of Jesus, made it to India. We don't know. What we have is Eusebius, who's writing 300 or 400 years after Christ. He's trying to write a history of the church, and he includes what the oral history told us of where each of the disciples went. And the oral history was that Thomas headed eastward and got as far as India and planted churches there. And I've even met Christians from India who said that their church traces their history to Thomas. But there's no verification of that, and the early missionaries that arrived there give no record of existing church communities. So it's just hard to say. Good question, though, yes. In 1322 and 23, same time that Jordan Katala is reaching India, new missionaries are arriving in mainland China, and in Central and Southeast Asia. They're getting as far as Indonesia and Thailand, Vietnam, these whole areas. But then a few decades later, in 1368, under the Ming Dynasty, China abolishes Christianity, makes it illegal. Small pockets will remain throughout the country, but most of them do not endure. So that's what's going on in the East. There's these noble but very scattered and I want to say weak, not in a derogatory sense, but they were very weak efforts. Just you're sending one person. That's going to be very hard to establish a long, enduring community with one person being sent. And then we have sub-Saharan African missions going on. So, North Africa was one of the, St. Augustine was from North Africa. Lots of early Christian fathers and leaders and writers and famous figures were from North Africa. But then you have this giant geographic barrier that changes things. And anything going south of the Sahara Desert it's a whole new world. So the sub-Saharan African missions were previously hindered by the desert and by insufficient naval technology. Sailing all the way around and down was not something that European nations were particularly adept at that point. I will mention, and we've mentioned this before, the technology of the Muslim nations was so far beyond what Europe was doing right at this point in history. Medicinally, philosophically, scientifically, engineering-wise, in every respect, the Muslim nations were advanced. And they had naval technology be going all over the place, which is one of the reasons that the Islamic faith traveled as quickly and as solidly as it did compared to the Christian faith during this era. But in this time of period, even though there wasn't a lot of technology to make it possible, there still was trade because people want money. And so as traders are going into sub-Saharan Africa, whether through the caravans through the desert or the arduous and difficult journeys around the coast, there's still contact happening through traders. And so these traders, most of them Portuguese or Spanish or Italian, they're meeting all these different nations, encountering hundreds of nations in sub-Saharan Africa, and in the late 15th century, many African kingdoms are requesting and welcoming missionaries. They're saying to these traders, hey, send us people to teach us this faith that you practice. They're surprisingly open and non-hostile to it. Now, whether it's that they want to build better trade or whether it's the seed of the gospel in their hearts, who can say? But what the history record shows is they're calling for and welcoming missionaries to come in. Several kings are baptized. Just a few that I was able to find record of. The king of Benin in 1485, the king of Senegal in 1489, and the king of Congo in 1491. Now, the reason that's significant is because a dominant mindset of missions in this era and all the previous eras was to convert the nation from the top down. You convert nations. You don't aim for individuals. You aim for nations. And you start at the top. If you convince the king to become a Christian, they are now a Christian nation. If the king gets baptized, everyone else is going to follow. Whether or not there's a true work of gospel in their heart, they're going to do it anyway. And that was, in general, the approach to missions for the first 1,700 years of the church. Even during the Reformation, that's a lot of what was going on in the European nations. Let's convert the kings, let's convert the princes and princesses, and then their whole nation will become Protestant instead of Catholic. There was more focus, for the most part, on the top-down approach. One challenge that would persist in all missions, but particularly in sub-Saharan African missions, was the imposing of cultural norms. The imposing of cultural norms, where the missionaries would demand and expect that African churches would look and act like European ones. We would import oversaw Poland and dropped it down in the middle of the Congo, and it's going to look and sound the same. And they're going to act the same. They're going to dress the same. They're going to behave the same. Which had the effect of creating the impression that the gospel was a European thing. It was a European thing. You had to become European in order to believe in Jesus. And this has sadly plagued missions all along. Even some of the heroes, what we would consider missionary heroes, have fallen prey to this. In the 17 and 1800s, a lot of the African missions would be writing letters back, please send us a pipe organ so we can worship here in sub-Saharan Africa, because it's got to look and sound just like it does back home. And it creates this mindset that you have to leave and abandon everything about your culture and become, for all intents and purposes, a European person in order to be a Christian. That had such a damaging effect, and still does have a damaging effect. And missiologists wrestle with this question of how far do we need a person to leave their culture? What actually needs to change? And this is something that a lot of missionaries have to study and struggle with. What in our culture what in this host culture is inconsistent with the gospel, and what is indifferent? And what in my own faith and practice is simply cultural? We don't like asking that question. But there's a lot that we do in our worship and in our practice that is merely the cultural expression of the faith rather than a necessary expression of the faith. And it's healthy for us to consider that. So, I'm doing great on time. Wow. Should have added another 100 years or so. Let's look at the New World. Columbus brings when did Columbus sail the ocean blue? 1492. He brought priests to the Caribbean in 1493. I tried to come up with a fancy rhyme to, 1493, Columbus did something. He brought priests to the New World. From the beginning, missions in the New World is hardly distinguishable from colonization. Similar to in sub-Saharan Africa. Let's pull you out of your culture. Let's change who you are. Let's make you look like us. And like we saw earlier, let's make you serve our rulers. Let's make you loyal to the crown of Spain or Portugal or wherever we're from. Sadly, the expanding of the gospel is being used too often for that purpose. For those who were not motivated by money or national glory to go exploring and to fund these great explorations to the New World, converting the heathens was used as a justification for exploration and colonization. You're trying to raise money, you're trying to convince the king or queen of your nation to support this endeavor to go sail all this distance and try to find this new place. And they're not persuaded that it's going to be a good financial return on their investment. They're not as concerned with their national glory because they got a war going on. But you say, but there are heathens there. There are nations of people who do not have the light of the gospel. We have to go convert them. Oh, well now I'm a bad Christian if I don't support your trip to the New World. But that's what they did. It was a good motivating factor. It's difficult to know if what we're seeing in these missions is genuine conversion or forced assimilation. There was both. Indisputably both. And as a result, it left scars that are still felt today. Kind of a bitterness towards the Christian religion because it was so closely associated with violent colonization. In China, one of the history of Chinese missions, one of the problems that is often mentioned is the missionaries came over on the gunboats in like the 17 and 1800s. The missionaries came over on the same boats that brought the weapons that were killing people. And the missionaries were being used as translators because they were the only ones taking the time to learn the language. They were being used as translators for the people who were persecuting and cheating and imprisoning and oppressing the people. And you know, even though the missionaries had nothing to do with that, it's guilt by association. And that's kind of the scars of how missions began in the New World. There was too much of an overlap between the missionaries and the soldiers that it became guilt by association. Even the wonderful, wonderful missionaries who loved the people and served them and preached the gospel and brought healing, they were too indistinguishable from the people who did the opposite. As there's this flood of explorers going into the New World in the very end of the 1400s, especially Spain and Portugal are fighting over all these territories in what we now call Central and South America. The Pope intervenes, trying to stop a war from breaking out between Spain and Portugal. And what he does basically draws a line down the middle, just a line, lines of longitude. I think it's 100 degrees, east or west or whatever. And he said, everything on this side, Spain. Everything on that side, Portugal. And then France kind of comes in and is like, hey, 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 what about us? But that's in the next century, so we're not getting into that. But it basically said, look, your two countries, you own these lands. You own them. And that gave, in the minds of Spain and Portugal, a religious mandate and right to do as they would with these nations, which again feeds into the leaving scars and just wishing that they'd gone back and read some Raymond Lull, that it's not going to be through conquest, it's going to be through loving them and serving them and persuading them. So that is the brief overview of missions to the world from about 1300 to about 1500. Questions, comments? Yeah.
You mentioned that the Buddhists, after Kublai Khan, the Chinese then pushed westward and this...
It was the Mongols. Sorry, it was the Mongols. The Mongolian Empire, yeah.
Okay. And, of course I know that the Muslims were anti-Christian, but I didn't know that Buddhists, Mongols were that aggressive.
Well, you got to think Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was the one who starts it all off, and he is aggressively expanding his territory from Korea to Eastern Europe. He had the largest empire in all of history and sustained it for a long time. Religion-wise, Genghis Khan wasn't really big into anything, but Buddhism had come to infiltrate as they expand through India and Central Asia, where Buddhism is growing. Kublai Khan is affected by Buddhism. Whether or not he's a Buddhist, it's hard to say, but he seems favorable towards that. But as he hears the Christian gospel, he says, there's some really good stuff here. Send me 100 Christian teachers. And then they don't show up. Kublai Khan dies. His successor is just aggressive. And he starts just kind of attacking and fighting his way west again. And he's just kind of crushing Christians and anybody in the way. So his thirst is not a religious thing, it's a power thing. It's not a Buddhist expansion, it's just a power expansion. And when you've got churches in these cities and towns and nations that are providing any sort of leadership or storing any sort of wealth, he wants it out of the way. He wants the wealth and the power.
So did the Muslims sort of do the same thing, or was theirs mostly motivated by religion or somewhat motivated by power like Genghis Khan?
It's kind of hard to say with the Muslims because, if you ask them, they're going to say they're motivated by the glory of Allah, and the Quran requires and calls for the expansion of the Islamic faith through conquest. We take over a land, we force people to submit, which is what Islam means. We force them to submit, and if they don't, depending on which part of the Quran you're reading, you either allow them to live in peace or you execute them. But also, obviously, there's going to be people who use those things, use religion as a tool for sating the lust for power and influence and authority. So, in reality, there's both going on. Other questions, comments?
What was the lifetime of Muhammad?
Lifetime of Muhammad.
It never said if that was the genesis of...
Yeah, I think he was late 4th century or early 5th century, but if somebody knows better, they can tell me, or if somebody has Google real quick. I don't know that offhand. I can tell you the lifetime of Jesus, but that's about it. great with dates. Other questions or comments? Yes, Donna.
Just in my knowledge, which like this is so over my head, but I thought the Buddhists were very peaceful people. And here, I do remember probably watching a movie of Kubla Khan,
Yeah.
but am I wrong?
Well, again, we don't know if Kublai Khan was himself a Buddhist. If anything, he was open to Buddhism or favorable towards Buddhism.
But wasn't that peaceful religion? I think
As with every religion, including the Christian faith, there is a gap between what it teaches and what its followers practice. And if you look, even in the missions especially, you look at what the followers of Christ are called to be and do. And then you look at what they were actually doing in some of these countries. There's a gap. Okay? So there's always going to be a gap between the doctrine and practice. And one of the roles of the church is try to narrow that gap and make sure that we who call ourselves by the name of Christ are actually living in a Christ-like way. Otherwise, we're accused of hypocrisy. So is Buddhism a peaceful religion at its heart? Yes. But it also practices violent things, and its followers can be violent. I love the way that Søren Kierkegaard put it. He's one of my favorite philosophers, a Danish philosopher from the 19th century. He said, look, if somebody stole my coat that you knew was mine and then ran around robbing stores and beating people up, I wouldn't want to get blamed for that just because he's wearing my coat. And people who call themselves Christian, in this case, and go about doing things that are not Christian, the name of Christ should not be blamed for that. But it is. So.
570 to 632.
570 to 632. Wow, I was way off. So, yeah.
I wonder if you might, since we have time, like the scars that we talked about, like how would you have a conversation with people today that are potentially still wounded by those scars and colonization?
Yeah. So the question is, how would we, since talking about the scars of colonialism, how would we have a conversation about that? You always ask these questions that need like another 30-minute answer, but they're good questions. What I would not do is simply say, oh, that wasn't us. You know, no, that was the Catholic Church. We wouldn't do that. You know, that to deflect is not healthy. There's the first step needs to be kind of an ownership and saying, yeah, in the name of Christ, people have done terrible things. People have done bad things, sometimes with good intentions, sometimes with bad intentions, and there's no denying that. And for that, we grieve. We grieve with you. We're offended by that. The church is upset by that and mourns that as well, and would seek to make right what is wrong. But then to say, you know, it's important to note, though, that some of these things that were done are inconsistent with what the gospel of Jesus would have us to do. Because here's what the gospel of Jesus would call us to. Here's the kind of service, sacrifice, selflessness, love. You just kind of try to bring it back to the gospel and say, this is what it would look like for someone to be consistent with the gospel. But we all fail in many ways. And sadly, people with power in the name of Christ have sometimes failed very grievously and hurt others. So that'd be the general tone of the conversation that and it's not hypothetical for me. I've had those conversations. So. Other questions? All right, well, we'll leave 2 minutes early. So if I had my voice, I'd lead us in a rousing course of the Church as One foundation, but I need to spare what's left for the second service. So.